There's some real confusion around COVID boosters. Bird flu research flies the coop, and a future HIV vaccine looks like more of a long shot. This is America Dissected. I'm your host, Dr. Abdul and Katelyn.
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Caitlin Jetelina.
And we're recording this on Tuesday, June 3rd at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Well, it's been a really momentous last 2 weeks here, Caitlin. I don't know where to start, but I do feel like a U.S. senator coming to terms with the fact of mortality as a justification to destroy healthcare for a lot of her own constituents might be the right place. And, well, I'll let you listen to the clip. Take a listen to Senator Joni Ernst at an event in her home state of Iowa. And I'm happy to say she's facing some criticism from her constituents about the big, ugly bill. Take a listen here.
When you are arguing about illegals that are receiving Medicaid benefits, 1.4 million, 1.4, they are not eligible, so they will be coming off. So people are not, well, we all are going to die. So for heaven's sakes.
Wow.
That's, I mean, it's just so bad.
It reminds me of the government in the Hunger Games, sort of just justifying like cruel, brutal government tactics that benefit nobody but her donor class in the most honest way. And the reality of it is that she's just saying the quiet part out loud. Caitlin, when you heard this, what did you think?
Yeah, I went straight to what you're thinking, right? Like this basically pulled the curtain back on this deeply callous logic that's been cloaked in bureaucratic language and fiscal responsibility talking points, honestly. It's this worldview that goes against entirely what us in public health work for, but around that health is expendable, that, right, if everyone eventually dies, why invest in things that delay suffering and prevent disease or extend life? It brings up another theme we've talked about too, Abdul, that risk is personal, that it's not collective. And what I think makes it even more insidious is that I think that this is a moment that they're trying to form as pre-bunking, as normalizing the inevitability of death, because what they're doing is setting the stage for what the constituents are about to experience. The biggest cuts in Medicaid in American history, losing coverage, skipping care, getting sicker, some dying. And I think people are realizing that this is coming, and especially the leaders, and don't want to be called out on it. Is that the strategy?
I mean, the question that you have to ask yourself is like, go way back and ask, when somebody willingly assents to government, like the question is, what is government for? Like, Why do you let government do the thing that government is doing? The idea is that you're trading off some level of direct autonomy. You're being taxed and you're willingly giving some of your autonomy to the government that has a monopoly on power. But then you're doing it for something, which is the idea that government can actualize outcomes that you alone could not, that would benefit you to some degree greater than what you could benefit yourself via your autonomy. And when an elected representative says, well, we're all going to die, what that suggests is that they have no concept of what government is actually for. Like, why is it that we do this thing called government in the first place? And it tells you what MAGA thinks. MAGA thinks that the purpose of a society is to continue to enrich the most powerful, and it doesn't really matter what happens to everyone else. Like that to me strikes me of this sort of new era of serfdom, right? Because like we've had governments like that in the past, right? That's kind of how like a lot of Europe in medieval times and a lot of society for a long time past has been organized ever since we figured out how to like plant stuff and like settle land. So like this is a really scary thing, and I just think it's really important for us to sort of step back first principles. If you don't think that government's job is to build things that help us all and would allow us all through our collective sacrifice and input to have better lives because of it, then like, what are you even doing here? And Joni Ernst has just, she just named the game.
And empower, right? I mean, all of this is doing is disempowering individuals too, and not even bringing up their first line of concerns, which is, when you go back to basics, exactly what you're saying, Abdul, the point of an elected representative is to represent your constituents. And so completely going against that. It's quite incredible. And she doubled down after this on her Instagram too. And so you're right. I mean, I think she's just she's saying the quiet part out loud, and it's getting backlash, as it should.
Imagine joking about people dying. Like, this is an elected representative. You're just joking about the idea that people are going to die because you're taking away their health care. Why? To pass a tax cut for the richest people and to grow the deficit by another $5 trillion over 10 years. Like, it's just, I mean, it's really hard to, there is no argument that would justify what they're doing, even the arguments that they're trying to use. And at this point, they're just plain-facedly lying. We should move on to another individual who sometimes plays fast and loose with the truth. When we last spoke, the FDA had just released rules for the next COVID booster, and it was a big change. FDA basically said that the booster would only be available for all seniors and people under the age of 65 if they had certain health conditions. There was a lot of controversy around pulling away recommendations for pregnant people and certainly children. But then a hero comes along, Katelyn. And the CDC contradicted the FDA guidance and said what?
Yeah, this is such a mess. And it is so confusing. And a lot of this, just a ton of whiplash. But you're right. So the political appointees of FDA announced exactly what you said, that vaccines would only be available to those over 65 and those under 65 with high-risk condition. Then RFK, longtime opponent of vaccination, announced that certain people like pregnant women and kids would no longer be eligible. And this was not based on any new data. It wasn't a decision made with input from pediatricians or OBs or vaccinologists or public health experts. He basically bypassed the usual scientific process and unilaterally changed national vaccine policy. Then what happened was CDC then publishes their recommendations that go against what RFK was basically said. So it appears that there was urgent conversations with CDC scientists, and CDC scientists had a small victory, and they did not go through with removing pregnant women and kids from eligibility. Instead, what they did was updated the guidance to say that should be based on shared clinical decision making, meaning that people can get the vaccine in consultation with their provider. I will say, well, one is that later this month, this June, the official meeting of ACIP, which is the external experts advisors, hopefully will clarify all of this confusion. I'm still kind of concerned that this meeting is not going to happen. RFK could still cancel or delay this meeting at any moment. But even if we start backing out of the weeds of this whiplash between scientific policy, my biggest concern is that the damage is already done, right? There's this wave of confusion due to unilateral political decision-making instead of using the established evidence-based processes, which has resulted in whiplash headlines, hurts trust, sows immense confusion, even among physicians, right? A lot of OBs are having questions right now. And in turn, it's going to reduce vaccine uptake. It's just incredible. And it makes me wonder the motivation behind this, whether confusion is the purpose, using as an indirect lever to sow mistrust in vaccines, whether they don't understand how policy is made. But I have a hard time believing that. Abdul, what are your thoughts?
I'm really interested to understand what happens next, right?
Yeah.
This is not an administration that has taken well to push back from within the bureaucracy. And that's what we just saw. So what happens next in terms of the future of ACIP, in terms of the future of the scientific core at the CDC? What is the backlash here? At the same time, there are real concerns, Katelyn, around how then a lot of the rest of the private bureaucracy, so think insurance companies,
Yes,
how they make decisions coming out of this. Is this coverable? Is this not coverable? And I also think that this is a point in which the broader practitioner community needs to step up and speak out. Like, I'd love to see all of the physicians boards and the AMA stand up and say, yes, we believe in clinical autonomy. we are the best arbiters alongside our patients with what is best. We traditionally have always believed in a system where a decision is made between a patient and their doctor. Obviously, the individuals make their decisions, but with the direct engagement of the doctor. And we don't want to see insurance companies taking all of the catastrophe that's happening in the federal government and weaponizing it against access to certain vaccines that we think are in the best interest of our patients and that our patients might want. But to your broader point, right, none of this is good in terms of broader vaccine uptake, which is bad for all of us as it stands. I think one of the central through lines of the logic of all of this is that a vaccine is an individual choice with no collective consequence. And that's just not true, right? Yes, a vaccine is an individual choice that an individual can make and should make for themselves. But there is a broader consequence when more individuals choose not to make that choice. Even if you're somebody who's gotten vaccinated, if you are in a less vaccinated environment, that is generally bad for you, right? And one of the examples of that is just thinking about measles. The sort of line is that the measles vaccine is 95% effective. That is true in an era when 95% of people had the vaccine, right? And so we actually don't know, like, if you are in an era now where you're 80% vaccination rate, what is the actual effectiveness of that vaccine? And like that, weirdly enough, is the logic that RFK and the folks around him are using around trying to call for more extensive testing in this new higher immunity environment. So like they understand this, but they're weaponizing a lot of it to sow mistrust and doubt around these vaccines in what I think are going to be some really damaging ways.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, it's not just damaging this collective good, but what I saw happen and transpire the past week is also damaging empowering the individual to make their decision as well, right? Only 14% of pregnant people got vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccine last year. There's a ton of room for improvement. I am concerned that 14% that would have gotten it is just not going to get it anymore because they saw headlines that they're not eligible anymore after really messy policy process. And so, it goes down to what we were first saying in the beginning is that it's just not empowering, right? Pregnancy is hard enough and confusing enough and scary enough without all the politics getting in the way of protection. The other thing that you mentioned was shared clinical decision making. And you're right, it is a decision between a physician and a patient. A lot of people don't have a physician though. And so what we miss with these shared clinical decision making is that people that don't have a physician or only get an OB in their third trimester about to go to the hospital, they're completely missed and completely ignores the reality that I think, 1/3 of Americans just don't have someone to make that shared clinical decision making. So it's a mess.
That's a great point, Katelyn. You're right. And this is also in an era where physician access is near an all-time low, in an era where they're gutting Medicaid. And so a lot of the lowest income people are not going to be able to see a doctor. Like, you have to think through all of the ways that these choices work together to create a whole that is just worse than the sum of its parts. And I really appreciate you bringing up that point.
So we not only got this confusing guidance on vaccines and COVID, we also got an update on the bird flu vaccine. Is that right, Abdul?
That's right. Thinking ahead here, the HHS made an announcement that they're terminating a nearly $800 million contract with Moderna. Moderna, of course, being one of the companies that developed an mRNA-based COVID vaccine way back in 2020. And that contract was to develop a vaccine that was being designed to protect against numerous strains of the flu, including the H5N1 avian influenza that we talked about so much here. They said they did this because of safety concerns with mRNA technology, despite the fact that there is no evidence that there's real safety concerns here. mRNA, of course, we talked about this a little bit last time, but the idea that mRNA, because it is genetic material, that it is inherently dangerous or interferes with our own genetics, is just a failure to understand basic genetics and cellular physiology in our bodies. mRNA is a note that comes out of DNA. There's not a situation where mRNA is going to go and back translate into DNA and change our genes. That's just not how it works. mRNA is an instruction to make certain proteins. Those proteins, of course, are proteins that are of the virus. Once they get made, your body initiates an immune response to it, and voila, now you have a trigger to trigger immunity should you actually come around and see that protein in the wild. Like, that's how this works. mRNA is incredible technology. It's technology that we spent billions of dollars to develop. And Moderna, of course, my big issue with Moderna was always that Moderna was a company that rolled out of NIH research, and that we should be able to negotiate them more strongly. Not that we should just end contracts with them and just give up on extremely successful technology that we spent a lot of money to develop against exactly this scenario, right? The thing that mRNA does for you that other vaccine modalities don't is it allows you to spin up a vaccine really, really quickly. The fact that we had this technology is the reason why we were able to spin up COVID vaccines as fast as we could, and now they're walking away from it. So you can imagine the doomsday scenario here, right? Where all of a sudden you start getting human-to-human transmission of H5N1 avian influenza, and now we're behind track rather than having been ahead of track, right? Because we'd already developed a version of this. Like you could imagine a forward-looking health policy, which was to say, we're going to develop this vaccine, and actually we're going to start to vaccinate farm workers who are at the highest risk, right, of potentially contracting H5N1 if they would like to take that up. But you would want to put this on the front line rather than destroy the capacity to make this early and then have to be struggling to figure out what to do if this in fact does go viral. What are your thoughts, Katelyn?
Yeah, and that's what other countries are doing, right? Is starting to vaccinate their frontline workers, so they continue to be protected around this really erratic virus. I just keep going back and shaking my head because we're moving from a proactive response and anticipating something coming down the pipeline to completely reactive, and it's going to kick us in the butt if and when H5N1 or another flu virus really comes to fruition. Like you said, mRNA is really fast and was one of the reasons we got vaccines out really quickly. Just look at how long Novavax took to really get us vaccines during COVID-19. That would probably be another 1 million lives lost while we are waiting for that. The other thing that H5N1 is problematic with regular vaccines is it uses eggs to create these older vaccine technologies. And guess what impacts egg availability is H5N1. So try to make it make sense. Really disappointing, though. I think that we should have developed this. We put it in a stockpile ready and go from there.
I 100% agree with you. Elsewhere on the RFK beat, they released a MAHA report on children's health that described U.S. children as, quote, the sickest generation in American history, blamed ultra-processed foods, environmental toxins, overuse of technology, and over-medicalization. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of things in this report I actually agree with, right? Like I don't disagree with the overuse of technology. And yes, environmental toxins are bad and ultra-processed foods are bad. However, right, there are a lot of questionable targets for where we should be driving health policy. Katelyn, you wrote about this in your incredible Substack, to which I hope everybody will sign up, called Your Local Epidemiologist. Look them up on Substack. It's one of the best Substacks out there. But you wrote about it and you outlined what the report got right and wrong. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so for everyone, just to back up, this is basically a descriptive report. The strategy to tackle these things is expected by August, which will be absolutely fascinating to understand what solutions they're coming to. But if we dig into the report, it was long. It covered a ton. But I like you said, the report got some things right. One, it's incredibly refreshing that we're talking about chronic disease. I think it raised urgent concerns about children's health. It emphasized prevention, right? Better nutrition, some physical activity, sleep, less screen time. It actually even called for systematic reform in programs in industry, which I also found pretty refreshing. That said, there were a ton of red flags. One, who are the authors of this? No idea. We later just found out that it may be AI. We can get into that in a little.
Say, ChatGPT, maybe manufacturing citations. Like that's what happens when AI does your homework. But
I know. Oh my God. Social determinants of health weren't talked about, like poverty not addressed or acknowledged. Major contributions to the U.S. lagging life expectancy were left out, like drug overdose, motor vehicle accidents, firearms, which is a leading cause of death for children and teens. and I think, there was just broad strokes against scientific consensus, right? Doubt on vaccines, doubts on some medicines, doubts on food safety. So I don't know, okay, fine. There's this report out there, but again, I come back to what's going to happen in August, because there's really two big unanswered questions to me. Is one, how are they going to accomplish this? Funding for a lot of these initiatives like SNAP have been slashed or on the table to be cut. Also, scientific research, environmental protection, farm to school programs, food and health agencies, like we can keep going on. Second, will the strategies that they present in August be grounded in science or in ideology? And I will see. I knowing RFK and his 20-year history, I think it's going to be ideology, but we'll see what comes out after this. The thing that got me the most, Abdul, was at the end when they said, we welcome academics and scientists to work with us to find solutions to this. And if you're writing a report, why don't you include them in the beginning and not as an afterthought in the end? And to me, that points to ideology.
Yeah. This is the thing about it. Look, whenever you're interpreting science to make public policy, there is always some point from which you are leaving the science part to the, hey, we're going to prefer the following policies within the broader realm of all of the things we have to balance. But in public health, like the central premise we use is how do you maximize the overall thrust and quote unquote efficiency of your intervention? How many people are going to be benefited to how much? And also the equity of your intervention. You can't just, get 100, 10% of your population to live to 150 and leave everybody else in the dust. You really want a more equitable distribution of those interventions. And that should be a disciplining feature of how you think about how you generate health policy. Like, how can we get the maximal efficiency and equity so that everybody is the healthiest? What are the big bang for our buck interventions that we should be focused on? And if you've listened to this podcast for long enough, that I think in so many ways, there are ways that we should be standing up to industry and taking on things like the cost of pharmaceuticals, the fact that we subsidize the wrong kinds of foods, the nature of monopoly when it comes to price fixing in food costs, healthcare generally, and access to healthcare. You all know, like, big fan of Medicare for all for a lot of reasons, but right, this sort of seems not to be based in that. And this is so much of, if we were to harvest like what influencers on Instagram are saying about what feels healthy, like this is a formalized report of that also happen to have 7 studies that do not appear to ever have been published, which suggests to me that AI definitely had a role in this, which is just really sad. I mean, Katelyn, just on that note, like, what do you make of that? Like, how else do you get 7 fabricated studies in the citation set of your HHS published report?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be written by ChatGPT, right? And you actually saw when you zoom in on the references that it was like a chat.ai.rf it is literally referenced in there. And it's just, to me, it left this big gaping hole as whether scientists, public health professionals, or physicians with strong scientific research and writing skills were even involved. And it just, it's hard to imagine that something like this would come from the federal government with such power. I mean, they have a huge microphone, and to do something like this is disappointing, to say the least.
Let me just say where I really agree. I would love to see RFK champion efforts to reform the way that our federal policy has been on the wrong side of big ag and big food. If he's able to really change the way that we subsidize foods, so that instead of focusing so much on huge factory farms in empowering, slaughterhouses to fix prices for American farmers and ranchers, if he's willing to sort of break up the increasingly forming oligopolies around the food space and where we buy our food, like if he's willing to actually fight that fight, I think that'd be amazing. I think there's a lot of great public policy that can come from that, and I'd love to see them fight the fight. The problem, though, here is that it's like you're rushing to get there without actually doing the hard, painstaking work. And one of the things you see from this administration is they either manufacture a crisis and then undo the crisis they manufactured and then declare victory on the whole issue, or they pick off some small part of it and then declare the big win as if they've solved the whole problem. And I worry that that's where they're headed. These fights, right, they're going to require you standing up to a whole lot of lobbyist money and support, a lot of corporate effort to push back an onslaught of negative advertising from the industry. So if they're willing to take that fight on, amazing. I really hope they will. It would redound to the benefit and the health of all of us. We'll see.
America Dissected is brought to you by the de Beaumont Foundation. For 25 years, the de Beaumont Foundation has worked to create practical solutions that improve the health of communities across the country. The foundation advances policy, builds partnerships, and strengthens systems to give everyone the opportunity to achieve their best possible health. To learn more, visit debeaumont.org.
All right. Next thing, Kennedy threatened NIH scientists from publishing work in major medical journals. He basically said he is going to create an in-house medical journal for NIH studies. Abdul, help us unpack this. Or how is this going to hurt scientific research?
Yeah. Let me just try and do a quick armchair explanation of how the publishing industry works, and then talk a little bit about the good parts of it and then the bad parts of it, and then why I think this is so dangerous. You've got journals that they're like the blue chip journals, the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, some of the Annals of Internal Medicine, Pediatrics, Science, Nature. Like these are blue chip journals, and they are private entities where you have editors that will first do a quick overview of the paper that gets sent in, right? They are constantly soliciting paper. Sometimes they're concentrating certain issues of the journal on broad swath issues. Sometimes it's just, generally what comes in the door. They'll do a quick review and then send it over to peer reviewers. Those peer reviewers tend to be people who are experts in the field in the particular area that the paper concerns. And then they review it. This review takes months and months. And then there are several iterations of backs and forths adjustments that are requested or clarifications that are requested. And then the paper gets published. But too often it gets published like 3 months after the peer review process is over. So that means that peer review is problematic for a couple of reasons. It's slow. It's somewhat arbitrary. There's not as much transparency around who the peer reviewers are. And then the fact that it's not open source is a real problem, that everyday people can't just get access to these journals. Usually you have to get them through a university, or you're paying huge amounts of money to access them. Those are all problems. But it is an objective process. The goal is to get to the best available evidence. And it's how we've been doing things for a very, very long time. And look, there's a lot of good science that has come out in the world, right? Like you and I are talking to each other from different rooms based on science that started out in peer-reviewed journals, right? The existence of the mRNA technology that saved millions of lives during COVID, it started out as evidence published in peer-reviewed journals. And the reason we do this is because we all want a transparent process where we're constantly updated on what the latest and greatest in science is, so we can work off of one another's discoveries. Now, this approach, right, that tells me that they want a lock on the kind of information, the kind of questions that get asked in the first place. B, they're worried about the quote unquote science that's going to come out of this ideologically specific form of the NIH, whether or not it'll actually pass peer review and get published in these top journals. And then 3, they're really focused on weaponizing the quote unquote science that's going to come out of the federal government against the broader scientific community. All of that is dangerous. And that's not to say that government hasn't been involved in publishing in the past. MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, is a CDC journal, but it has followed exactly the same rules for the same time as other journals. Other folks can publish in it. The CDC can publish in it. So these are all open questions that I think are going to be quite dangerous. Katelyn, what do you make of this?
So I have published a ton, and there are a ton of problems with publishing. Like you said, Abdul, behind a paywall drives me absolutely insane. Us scientists usually have to pay, I don't know, $5,000 to get it published in an open source. And that's, taxpayer money is already paid for that study. It's wild to me how much these publishers can make. That said, peer review publishing is also a headache, but I will say that every single time makes my science so much better and so much clearer, and fills gaps to move the science forward. And like you said, they're putting this all in-house with very lack of transparency makes me incredibly nervous. MMWR, you're right, is published by the CDC. However, they do make a lot of big mistakes over at MMWR, and we saw this during the pandemic of really poor science being published very quickly. And so there's a lot at stake here, and not the inability for brilliant scientists within federal government to not join the scientific conversation outside of NIH is so short-sighted, and I don't understand the value or what the value add is there. Last point I'll make is that I find this news came out, 2 or 3 days after the FDA put out a New England Journal of Medicine article about their policy changes with COVID-19 vaccine. And so it is so hypocritical, and it does not seem like the right hand's talking to the left hand, and it's continues just to be a mess. We'll see. I don't know if they have the guts to actually do this.
It seems like this is more coming from RFK himself. You had the NIH director, Jay Bhattacharya. He looks like he disagrees. He actually says, and I quote, "I can send my paper out even if my bosses disagree with me," but that was put out before Kennedy publicly floated this idea. So it seems like this is an issue that has created some contention. You can imagine a lot of really strong NIH scientists saying, look, if I'm only allowed to publish in NIH journals, right, this sort of takes me out of contention for other jobs in science that I might be interested in. So thank you, but no thank you. But that's also a dangerous thing. If you end up having a lot of the best scientists leave, right, who do they get replaced by? And that's a dangerous situation. We've also been reporting on NIH cuts for weeks now. The newest cuts are hitting HIV research. And last week, NIH announced that they're terminating $250 million program to find a vaccine for HIV. I just want to note on this, right, that this is part of a broader effort that we've seen in this administration that has targeted HIV specifically, which feels as if it is the scientific component of an effort to target LGBTQ individuals that is more consistent with broader themes that we've seen out of this administration. As we know, HIV disproportionately affects LGBTQ folk, and this just feels cruel, especially as you mount it next to other cuts for HIV research, cuts to HIV programs abroad, cuts in HIV programs here in the US as well. And so, Katelyn, what do you make of this?
Unlike other viruses, just to back up, HIV mutates incredibly quickly and hides from the immune system. And so there's been so many vaccine candidates that have failed over the past few decades. But the US continues to push forward because scientists really think that there's something here, right? And they've stayed persistent, have had heavy support on long-term research efforts with not just national implications, but global implications. The program being cut is led by teams at Duke and Scripps, and they were testing this innovative strategy that involves this thing called broadly neutralizing antibodies. And these antibodies showed a lot of promise in animal studies and offered really long-term protection against HIV strains. Interestingly, in May, so about 2 weeks ago, Scripps and Duke put out an announcement on a huge breakthrough that clinical one trials showed on humans showed a ton of promise. And this, I truly think we are much closer right now than ever to a real breakthrough. Of course, you have to do trial 2 and trial 3, but now that rug is just being pulled out. The grant's not going to be reviewed. They have 1 year left of funding to really salvage their progress and try to figure out an alternative support. And it's not just canceling this research, but it's really unraveling years of coordinated work and building this Lego of bricks that we just get we're so close. And it's again so short-sighted. I just don't get it.
The tough part is anybody who's looking for some sort of ideological through line here wants to make it all make sense, but it really doesn't. This is about how do you read a very specific kind of ideology into federal government and then make long-term decisions in that format around short-term political gain. And the consequences are that, we've been working on this issue for many administrations, all of whom agreed that ending the HIV/AIDS pandemic was a goal we ought to really invest in. And I think for most people, they'd agree with that.
It's also not just clipping of this research, right? The rest of HIV surveillance work and other HIV activities are going away. Some of it is going to move to this new Make America Healthy Again HHS arm. But the problem is that this money doesn't go to every state. We are moving backwards, not just with the science and the research around vaccines, but just prevention work right now too. And it's going to take decades to rebuild as well.
On that note, Katelyn, obviously we discussed a lot of very troubling things this week, but I had a really hopeful conversation with a leader that I've really come to admire as I've gotten to know more and more about her work. That's Dr. Carmen Rojas. She's the president of the Marguerite Casey Foundation. They've been a longtime supporter of the pod, but I wanted to interview her because they made a really courageous decision in this moment. Marguerite Casey Foundation funds a lot of really important social justice work and equity work. And they made a decision to say, you know what, in an era where a lot of philanthropy is pulling back as a function of fear of retribution, we're actually going to step forward. And so they're dipping into their endowment in a way that you're not seeing from a number of other philanthropies. And our conversation, as two children of immigrants, really was quite deep, and it speaks to, I think, a lot of the places where we can find courage in a moment like this. And I just really appreciated hearing Carmen tell her story about her parents and about all the ways that she understands the opportunity in front of her in a moment of deep pain for a lot of people. So I hope folks will stick around because it really was an inspiring conversation for me. All right, Katelyn, I'm I would ask you where you are, but you're actually in California, as am I, ironically enough. So
welcome to the beautiful weather, Abdul, and I'll see you tonight.
I look forward to it. All right, friend. See you soon.
All right, bye, guys.
All right. Can you introduce yourself for the tape?
I can. Carmen Rojas, President and CEO of Marguerite Casey Foundation. Really excited to be here today because I believe that our government should be doing more for working people. And we're in a moment in which it is not. It's frankly at the behest of billionaire institutions. And in this moment, the thing that I'm sitting with is the set of attacks that this administration is openly taking against the nonprofits that feed our hungry, that show up after a climate catastrophe, that make sure that kids have a place to go after school, and to protect not only our freedom to give to those institutions, but the freedom of those organizations to be able to serve community members that we care about.
Yeah, I really appreciate that because I think it frames so much of the challenge of this moment and why we wanted to have you on the show. You've been a longtime leader in philanthropy, and it's hard in this moment because so much of philanthropy has not met this moment, and you all have thought differently. I want to step back just for some context. What do you understand about why this administration is trying to weaponize government against philanthropy and against the nonprofit industry right now?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. One, this administration is trying to attack any and everybody who they see as an ideological opponent. So people who have different beliefs, people who want different things. And it has been clear that a couple of features show up. So anybody committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion is on the hit list for this administration. It doesn't matter if you're a law firm, a university, if you're an individual. We have seen this administration take up attacks either through doxing or through detention of people who have a fundamental belief that our strength is our diversity. And I feel like that is one reason the administration is choosing to attack philanthropy, but frankly, like civil society writ large. I think, secondly, and something near and dear to our work, is that this administration is seeking to attack and demobilize anybody that believes that government should be doing right by the majority of people who live in this country. And if those people are undocumented, if they are protesters, if they are seen in any way as antagonistic to this administration, they are seeking to paralyze the ability of those folks not only to have representation, but also to have a voice in what our government looks like. I'll say third, for us, is they are seeking to narrow the universe. They have found these ways to, like these wedges, for us to be able to rely or lean on fear or hate, rely on distrust of each other as human beings, as brothers and sisters on this planet. And the place we have seen that most strikingly has been on Palestine, has been on our institutional belief at Marguerite Casey that where life is precious, all life is precious. And we're living in a moment in which tens of thousands of people have been killed with resources by a U.S. government, and there is a desire to justify that death. And we want to, as an institution, say no, this government isn't just for rich people. It's for everybody here. No, this government isn't just for white nationalists. It's for people who are committed to diversity, to equity, and to inclusion. And no, we want to use our resources to ensure that our hungry are fed, that our poor are housed, that working people can make a living wage and not have our resources feed a war machine that is killing tens and thousands of people.
I really appreciate you laying that out, because I think, what you just shared is something that you don't hear very much from a lot of foundation or nonprofit leaders. I think there has been this instinct to prematurely obey, to not say things that could get you targeted, to stand back. And I think part of the challenge is that courage is contagious, and it takes leadership to be willing to stand up and be courageous and call out the obvious, honestly, because it is so hard to do. And you all have chosen to do that in the face of a lot of very stark, potentially very risky attacks. Part of that is in what you've chosen to continue to fund. Can you talk through how you've thought about those choices, about funding, and about where you invest? Because part of the hard part is this. I think, nobody in philanthropy or even in the nonprofit sector believes that they should be filling in for the things that government is doing. And at the same time, government is pulling back so profoundly, right, that you're watching as, catastrophic impacts are happening. So how are you thinking about the role or the changing role of philanthropy to try and, stick your finger on the hole here for the time being, right? Given that, if some of these changes are made permanent, which I think a lot of us fear they may be, then it's going to be unsustainable. How do you think about making funding choices in that kind of a context, particularly where it comes to healthcare, and public health?
Yeah. So our board, an organization more broadly, has been preparing for this political moment for about 18 months. This administration has been clear, has been shouting, as people say, like some people are signaling. These folks have been shouting exactly what they've been planning to do for some time now. And I think that there are a couple of places where we have made interventions. One is we have committed to giving out more money than we ever have in Marguerite Casey's history. In a normal year, we give out $25 million. This year, we're committed to distributing $130 million, 50 of which has already gone out the door. And your question is a question that we are sitting with, right? And that we have sat with for a long time as an institution, because unlike a number of foundations who have issue areas, we have a very unique mission, which is to make sure that people understand that government should be working for them, that philanthropy and charity is no replacement. If let's just take one issue, Medicaid cuts. If there are $700 billion cut from Medicaid, there's no amount of charity that can make up for that. There's no amount of foundations, no amount of that amount is a promise that we have made to our people. And our objective is not to fill the hole or to replace. It's to create the amplifying power of people coming together to demand that government fulfill that promise. And so that is one way we have thought about it. I think, at our core, we fund community organizing. We fund organizations across the country, from rural North Carolina to Michigan, from Texas to Arizona, really different places across the country where I am clear that with or without our support, working people are coming together to fight for a better life for their families. And what we can do by providing resources in this moment, in past moments, in the future moments, is to create a more even terrain in that fight. And so I don't have the hubris to believe that somehow we're going to foundation or donor our way out of this political moment. I think that philanthropy has a unique role, which is to make sure that the organizations that are doing the political education, the organizations that are creating a line of sight for everyday citizens about not only their responsibility as citizens of this country, but their rights as citizens of this country, to make sure that people have the ways to come together to demand that government actually work to make their lives better. And so that is sort of on a very practical level, the way that we've been thinking about it.
I love that. And so, it's a catalytic framework that I think is extremely valuable. And if the challenge right now is that government has turned against government, which is exactly what this political moment is, then there is a extreme need to be able to catalyze the kind of civic activity that can call government to the highest, its greatest angels, and that operates through community organizing. I think the challenge that a lot of folks have that you guys are walking, I think, really quite elegantly, is the capital P versus the lowercase p political, right? Is that the outcome of democratic processes aren't just elections, like partisan elections. They're people coming together, sharing and engaging on challenges they want solved by government and making those demands. And that is a civic exercise that is bigger than the partisan political process. And in your organization, you guys are recognizing that work is actually fantastically more critical now than it ever has been. The other point of profound courage, that in my interactions with philanthropy sometimes, is that the aims of philanthropy may be progressive, but the actions of philanthropy sometimes are lowercase c conservative, right? Mm-hmm. Meaning philanthropic organizations tend to be less willing to take big risks and more interested in operating within a very narrow seam because they don't really have to take risks, right? And you guys are doing exactly the opposite. I mean, you're doing the thing that almost no major organization in this moment has been willing to do, which is to dip in your endowment and start spending it down for purpose. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about both that decision and then also why it's so rare?
Yeah, it's multiple fold. So one, our board and staff has been clear about the threat, and we keep hearing, like we've heard for the last 3 years about the threat to democracy. And if it feels like a threat, then we have to respond like it's a meaningful threat, as opposed to pretending like every action is actually productive. If it is an actual threat, let's actually prepare to be adversaries to protect against that threat. It's the difference, you're a doctor. So in my mind, it's the difference between like taking a children's Tylenol or an inoculation against something that we think is widespread and going to harm the majority of people in this country. We want to respond at the scale of inoculation for us, and say that we did the most things possible. The second is deeply personal. My dad immigrated from Venezuela. My mom immigrated from Nicaragua. And while many people in the United States look at Nicaragua and Venezuela and say, those are those kinds of countries over there where there are turns politically like the ones we are experiencing now, that is impossible here. I've experienced a very deep pain of not being able to go back home. Like Venezuela is a place that I spent my childhood, and my dad is likely to die without ever going back. And that is a very real pain. And I didn't want to not heed the gift of being born the child of immigrants from wonderfully magical places that have turned in a short period of time. That is a gift for me. And so I came with that same level of urgency. What would I have done, in the moment that Daniel Ortega started to come after students, shooting them in the street for fighting for their elders because they were cutting pensions? What would I have done there? What would I have done in Venezuela in the time of a political election, of a presidential election, when the results were thrown into the garbage and burnt? What would I have done there? And I wanted to heed the call, which is, we have a moment, which is right now. And I feel like organizationally, we have moved, responding as if the world is our mirror, as opposed to the world being the thing that we distinguish ourselves from. And I feel like that has motivated that. I think on your point about, I'd say like liberal words, conservative action, these jobs are really weird, Abdul. Like there's a belief that everybody should like you because you aren't accountable. And I see power as something, as a responsibility. And if people aren't upset with me, and people don't disagree with me, and people don't like the decisions that I have made as a leader of this institution, then I'm not doing my job right. I think, and I'm really proud at so many leaders in philanthropy who are in this moment sort of organizing and grappling with needing to be adversarial in a context where it's just not a part of our function, even though we are overwhelmingly resource powerful, overwhelmingly people powerful, overwhelmingly access powerful. To then say we're going to use that power and actually fight feels like an amazing stance that many institutions are taking.
There's so much there I want to pick up, and I just so grateful to you for invoking your family's immigrant heritage, because I think I share so much of the feeling of knowing what it's like to both see other perspectives on your own country as a function of a lived or at least told history from a different place, right? And my folks immigrated from Egypt I spent a lot of my childhood summers there. There was never democracy in Egypt, and I think we had it for one election, but for most of anyone's experience in that place, there has been no democracy. And I remember talking to my father about this moment, and him saying, you know, for 46 years since I immigrated here, I've taken for granted that I can say whatever I want about whoever I want, wherever I want, and nobody can tell me anything because I'm protected by the Constitution. And he said, for the first time in my life here, it feels more like Egypt than it does like America. And, you know, it's interesting, right? Because one of the things that they want to come after are immigrant experiences like yours and mine, which in so many respects are actually so much more profoundly embracing of what it means to be an American, because you actually have a comparison, right? Most people born and raised here don't have a comparison set. It's just like, this is the place that you've always known. And there is no context for actually what would it be like to be elsewhere, right? And I think travel does that for folks in a certain way. But when you have elders who have lived experiences in a different place, who made this like incredible act of hope to come and build a new life in a new place, there is a value and a currency to that hope that gets passed down, and a requirement to understand the contrast between what is and what would have been. And I think that, you know, thinking about the kind of righteous action that you all are taking, being founded in both protecting what it means to be America, also in full recognition of how short sometimes we've fallen from the ideal of what we want to be, with respect to also protecting the notion that there should be people in this country who come with those alternative, contrasting experiences. I think there's something both poetic and powerful in that, and I wanted to call that out. The other thing is also about, you know, there's something that comes with the notion that you're kind of playing, you know, in your own life with house money, in the sense that, you know, I know from my experience, I spent a lot of time with my cousins in Egypt who don't live the same lives that I live. Very, very different lives, not as a function of hard work or talent, but as a function of opportunity. That's right. And, you know, in the moments where I've made risky decisions, both as an institutional leader and then also as an individual, folks sometimes look at that and say, well, that's a lot of risk. And I'm like, you don't understand. Like, I'm an accident of history. Like, the life that I got to live should not have actually been. So I know what I got. Like, and at the end of the day, you know, that ability to sort of then walk in and say, I know also what I'm protecting and why that matters, I think is so important. And I just really appreciate you sharing that, and also acting openly. I think because there's another way to act, which is to say, oh, you're the lucky one, so you need to protect that privilege with everything you've got because you're the lucky one. And, you know, and I think it's a different comportment on the world.
Oh, I love this description. You know, one of the things that is never lost on me is that my mom at 18 left her 16 siblings. She's second eldest of 17 kids. In this small town where she could have had a good life, you know, like a really good life. Like if she did not want for more outside of this small town, but she wanted for more. And she wanted, she wanted for a different life. If she did not come to San Francisco, not speaking one word of English, working, sewing clothes in factories throughout San Francisco. If she had not done that, you know, my parents didn't graduate from middle school. Wow. And I think that we have like a story about how horrible your life is if you don't do those things. Again, like, I think she could have had a decent life. And she blew open the entire universe. It's like looking at stars as like stickers on the ceiling of a room, you know, the glow in the dark stars, and then looking at stars in the night sky. And she opened up the night sky to me and to my brothers, to you know, Nicaragua entered a revolutionary period. People left, and there was a place for them to come to, our house, the place where I lived. And all of those people worked taking care of people's kids, cleaning people's houses, making people's lives better and easier here, and knew that they were having this experience of going from looking at the stars on the ceiling to looking at the stars in the sky. My dad was 17, left this small island off the coast of Venezuela, 10 generation of fishermen.
Wow.
On this island. That's all my dad knew. We didn't go to elementary school. And got this crazy Hollywood producer saw him selling fishes in the market. He was the youngest of 10 kids. And he was like, you're going to be the next James Dean, and got my dad an airplane ticket, a visa to come to the United States to be a movie star. And my dad did not finish elementary school. And so the Hollywood career didn't take off, but he ended up working in restaurants, ended up making it to San Francisco, working in restaurants, had my middle brother and knew he needed a job, and got a job as a union truck driver. Where, we were Latino middle class, my parents could take vacations. We never wanted for anything more, like the sky, the stars in the sky were enough for all of us. My parents had a kid, me, who ends up getting a doctorate from one of the best public universities in the world, getting to live everywhere, getting to have this job. And so I am clear that everybody deserves to see the night sky. Everybody deserves to see the night sky. And I want to make sure that I do everything that I can in this job and in whatever job I have, to be able to make that available and not create restrictions on only people with green and blue eyes can see the night sky. Only people without student debt can see the night sky. Only people who can afford the rent that's too damn high can see the night sky. I want it for everybody because my parents wanted it for me. My people wanted it for me.
I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you sharing those stories. I know there's so much inspiration and motivation and clarity that comes from remembering your people. There is a profound attack on exactly those kinds of people right now, right? And there's not just an attack on them, which is the most brutal and cruel, but there's an attack on any institution that wants to help that be a part of the American story. And, in your case, one of the things that has been discussed is quite wonky, but also really quite profound, which is the idea of taxing endowments or taxing philanthropy, which is, ironically, right? This is the ironic thing about all of it, is that a lot of these big major philanthropies come from the last progressive era when rather than just tax the wealth that ended up being in philanthropy, the government basically agreed that, well, you can just sort of start these philanthropies and then you can direct your giving rather than actually just getting taxed at a level, right? So that we can invest in public funds. And that's when you get all these big major blue chip philanthropies. And now it's funny because they're coming back to sort of tax this, right? Because they don't like the direction that it's gone. And I want to ask, just functionally, what would be the implications of that move? And what would it mean for the kind of work that you guys are able to do?
I'm going to do in honesty and say it would be nominal for us as an institution. We are now, I think we pay 1.4% and we would go up to 5%. And we are having a really tough conversation about being honest. I love this notion for myself of being like simple, direct, and truthful. And I think that there's a way in which we can focus on this excise tax that you're describing and the taxing of endowments and the profits made on endowments. And then there's everything else, right? So like, if we just focus on this excise tax and not on the $290 billion that's going to be cut from SNAP, then
Right.
I don't know that we should exist.
Right.
If we're going to focus on the excise tax and again, the $700 billion that's going to be cut from Medicaid, I don't know that we should exist. You know, the thing that I try to remind our staff, remind our board, remind our peers is that philanthropy and donors exist in Russia. They exist in Venezuela. There are benefactors in these places. There are rich people who play for the things that they like, for the issues that they care about. They exist. They exist everywhere. So we have an opportunity to actually tether the fate of our institutions with people writ large, people who don't care, don't know, don't have time to think about whether or not our rich institutions are taxed at 1% or 5% or 10%. We have an opportunity now to tether our fates together and say that our institutions matter for the purpose of creating greater opportunity, greater dignity, the greater amplification force of what community organizing does. But if we just focus on this excise tax, I worry that we will have missed the forest for the trees. You know, we will have missed the opportunity to have a shared fate for everybody in this country.
Yeah, I really appreciate that because there's a way, it's interesting that like institutions that are other serving sometimes become very self-referential in the ways that they will think about what the problem really is. And you know what I hear in your answer is that, you know, okay, yeah, like this would kind of suck, but it doesn't suck nearly as bad as watching your healthcare go away, or watching your local hospital shut down, or watching the program that benefits your kid at the local public school that's fundamentally critical to that kid's ability to be and do like a normal kid in their school get shut down. That doesn't suck as bad as losing like a lot of our mental health infrastructure in this entire country, right? Which is exactly what they're coming from.
And I think that there's like a different way to have the argument, which is again, it's to be adversarial and not conciliatory, is to say, why aren't you taxing polluters? Look at what these polluters are doing to our communities. Why aren't you taxing grifters, people who get rich off of people's poverty, people who suppress wages, people who the only way they could imagine us existing is in a context of the exploitation of other human beings. Why aren't you taxing those folks? Why aren't you taxing the people who have enough money to privatize everything, right? Like why aren't you taxing those folks to actually call the question the fight? And create a different alternative. Weapons manufacturer. We could think of tech companies. You know, we could think of so many people who have benefited, who have been parasites on our government. Tesla, a parasite on our government. Google, a parasite on our government. Facebook, a parasite on our government. Benefited from government investment. Our dollars went into investing into those companies. And now those people want to pull the ladder up behind them and say, now that I'm a billionaire, you don't get to benefit. You people, we're going to sort of tap into your worst fears. We're going to exploit you in the workplace. We're going to make it so the rent is too damn high in the places where you live. And even though we got to benefit from government investment, ordinary people don't get to. I feel like that is the fight that we should be having, and not whether or not we're going to see this excise tax. But this is to your earlier point about, like, for me, this is an ideological fight and not a partisan fight, right? Like, very few Democrats are actually saying, let's tax polluters. Very few Democrats are saying, let's tax corporations. Very few Democrats are going after tech and monopolies. It's like three. And we could probably find three Republicans who have similarly strong feelings about these issues, right? Like, we are, by, saving grace by a handful of Republicans being saved from the Medicaid cuts. So like, this is not a partisan issue. This feels like an ideological issue. It feels like a values issue. And I am just, Matt Desmond has this amazing, at the end of his last book, like this saying, like, I'm just a poverty abolitionist. It doesn't make sense to live in the richest country in the world and have people who work sleeping on the street. And if that's the way that we want to act, if you want to call that partisan, call it partisan. If you want to call it to the left, great. I don't actually care. I feel, again, I think the stars in the sky should be available to all of us. And that is the job that I have now.
Yeah. No, it's a humanitarian argument. That's the thing about it, right? Is that we, I think too often politics becomes very similar to the point that we were making about philanthropy or any sort of large, powerful institution. It becomes an end unto itself rather than a means to service a broader set of ideals. And I think, you think about our politics, we created all of this language to code politics on this left-right spectrum that doesn't exist anywhere except for some people's minds.
Yeah.
And we don't actually pay enough attention to, is this achieving an outcome that makes more people's lives better, easier to live, more sustainable, that makes our communities kinder and more empowering, that makes our bodies and minds healthier and longer lasting and better functioning. And like, when you sort of think about those ends and you ask if you're positioned in a role of leadership, whether it's in philanthropy or public service or even in business, right? In civics, if you can yoke what you're doing to those outcomes, things become a lot clearer. And I think what happens is we take too seriously the well-being of the sort of means and not seriously enough the actuation of the ends. And I think when we focus on the ends, a lot of these things become a lot more crystalline. They become a lot clearer. They become a lot simpler. And I wish more people were doing that, which is why we're so grateful to have had the opportunity to talk to you. Our guest today was Dr. Carmen Rojas. She is the president and CEO of Marguerite Casey Foundation. I have to say that they've been a long-standing supporter of this show and so many other spaces where conversations are attempted to be made simple. So really appreciate you joining us, sharing your wisdom, sharing your family story, and sharing your courage with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
That's it for today. You can find more of our content at our website, incisionmedia.co, and check out our shop at store.americadissected.com for our America Dissected merch, which includes logo shirts, hoodies, and mugs. And don't miss out on our Make America Scientific Again caps. If you have guest recommendations for the show, do share them with us. Send us an email at info@incisionmedia.co. You can follow or subscribe to America Dissected on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube at America Dissected. And you can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Abdul that's no dash. And don't forget to subscribe to Katelyn's incredible newsletter, Your Local Epidemiologist, which breaks down the latest scientific information for 300,000 readers. You can just search Your Local Epidemiologist on Substack. Finally, on your way out, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, drop us a like or comment. Word of mouth still goes a long way too. So if you know someone who might like to keep up with everything that's happening in the world of health, let them know. America Dissected is a product of Incision Media. Our co-host is Dr. Katelyn Gentilina. Our producer is Andy Gardner-Bernstein. Video and audio editing by Nadine Melkonian. Our theme song is by Taka Suzawa and Alex Sugiura. Sales and marketing by Joel Fowler and Nick Freeman at Big Little Media. Our executive producers are Tara Knight and me, Dr. Abdul Al-Sayed, your host. Thanks for listening. This show is for general information and entertainment purposes only. It's not intended to provide specific healthcare or medical advice and should not be construed as providing healthcare or medical advice. Please consult your own physician with any questions related to your own health.